Three thugs thought they could prey on a decorated war hero, but they never noticed the silent guardian watching from his post at Crown Haven Palace. On this crisp autumn morning, their arrogance would lead to a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of royal protocol. Sometimes true duty means breaking every rule to do what's right. Before we dive into this incredible true story of honor and courage, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell to never miss another inspiring tale of everyday heroes who stand up for what's right. Now, let us transport you to Crown Haven Palace, where our story begins. The morning sun cast long shadows across Meridian Square, painting Crown Haven Palace in hues of amber and gold. Its ancient stone walls stood as a testament to centuries of tradition, while the perfectly manicured gardens drew tourists from around the world. Among the visitors that morning, cameras flashed and children pointed at the stoic figures standing guard at their posts. Adrian Reeves stood motionless at his station, his polished boots reflecting the early light. At 28, he was one of the younger members of the Royal Guard, but his bearing suggested years beyond his age. His crimson uniform, adorned with gleaming brass buttons, represented more than just ceremony. It was a symbol of unwavering dedication. 3 years of training had taught Adrian to maintain absolute stillness while remaining acutely aware of his surroundings. His eyes, though seemingly fixed straight ahead, tracked every movement in his peripheral vision. He had learned to read the subtle signs that distinguished curious tourists from potential threats. The morning crowd moved in its usual patterns, families posing for photos, tour guides gesturing at architectural features, and the occasional history enthusiast trying to catch a guard's eye. But something felt different today. A tension hung in the air, prickling at Adrian's trained instincts. From his post, he could see Noah Parker, his fellow guard and closest friend, stationed at the opposite gate. They had joined the Royal Guard together, sharing dreams of serving with honor. Now they communicated through imperceptible signals, a language of micro-expressions developed over countless shared shifts. The autumn breeze carried snippets of conversation and the rustling of fallen leaves across Meridian Square. Adrian's attention was drawn to a particular sound, the steady tap of a cane against the cobblestones. The rhythm was familiar. It belonged to one of the regular visitors to Crown Haven Palace. Walter Harrison, a 95-year-old veteran, made his way across the square with measured steps. His back remained straight despite his advanced years, and his chest bore an impressive array of medals earned in service to his country. Adrian had come to recognize the old soldier over the past months, admiring the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Walter would visit the palace grounds, often stopping to pay his respects at the War Memorial Garden. Sometimes he would chat with other veterans who gathered there, sharing stories of courage and sacrifice that few today could truly understand. Adrian had overheard fragments of these conversations during his rotations, each one deepening his respect for these living legends. Today, however, something was amiss. 3 men had entered the square, their body language setting off warning signals in Adrian's trained mind. They moved with an aggressive swagger, their eyes fixing on Walter's medals with predatory interest. Their worn leather jackets and unkempt appearance stood in sharp contrast to the refined atmosphere of Crown Haven Palace. The leader of the group, a tall man Adrian would later know as Daniel Cooper, nudged his companions and jerked his head in Walter's direction. A smirk played across his face as they began to drift closer to the elderly veteran. Adrian's muscles tensed imperceptibly. Years of training screamed at him to maintain his post, to trust in the palace's security systems and protocols. Royal guards were not meant to intervene in civilian matters unless there was a direct threat to the palace or its occupants. Yet something in him rebelled against these constraints as he watched the scene unfold. Walter had paused near a bench, seemingly unaware of the approaching threat. He adjusted his medals with weathered hands, each piece of metal representing moments of extraordinary courage and sacrifice. The morning sun caught them, sending brief flashes of light across the square. Commander Grace Sullivan's words from training echoed in Adrian's mind. A Royal Guard's first duty is to the Crown, but never forget that we serve the people that Crown represents. The words had struck a chord with Adrian then, and now they seemed to take on new meaning, as he watched three predators close in on a man who had given everything for his country. Noah Parker, from his position across the square, had also noticed the developing situation. His posture remained perfectly regulation, but Adrian could read the concern in his friend's stance. They both knew that what happened next could change their careers forever. The tourist crowds continued their cheerful explorations, oblivious to the tension building in their midst. Cameras clicked, children laughed, and tour guides recited their well-rehearsed speeches about Crown Haven's history. Yet in this peaceful scene, Adrian Reeves stood on the precipice of a decision that would challenge everything he had been taught about duty, protocol, and honor. Walter Harrison's cane tapped steadily on the cobblestones as he made his way toward the War Memorial Garden, unaware that behind him, three men were about to mistake his age for weakness, and unaware that a young royal guard was preparing to risk everything to prove them wrong. Daniel Cooper and his two companions, Tommy Walsh and Luke Bennett, had been watching Crown Haven Palace for days. They'd noticed how the elderly visitors often wore their medals, proud displays of their service that glinted temptingly in the sunlight. The three men had already sold several medals to underground collectors who didn't ask questions about origins. But Walter Harrison's collection promised to be their biggest score yet. The old veteran's steady progress toward the War Memorial Garden made him an easy target. Tommy, the youngest of the three, shuffled impatiently from foot to foot, earning a sharp glare from Daniel. "Cool it," Daniel muttered. "We do this smart, like always." But there was nothing smart about their chosen hunting ground. They had no way of knowing that Adrian Reeves had already cataloged their every movement, every gesture, building a mental profile of the threat they posed. Adrian's training had taught him to recognize predatory behavior. He'd spent countless hours studying crowd dynamics, learning to spot the subtle signs that distinguished tourists from troublemakers. These three moved differently. They ignored the palace's grandeur, showed no interest in taking photos, and their eyes kept returning to Walter's medals with calculated interest. The morning crowds continued their usual patterns, creating a strange counterpoint to the tension building in the square. A tour group passed between Adrian and the developing situation, their guide's cheerful voice describing the palace's architectural features. "Notice the Victorian Gothic revival elements," she said, gesturing at the spires above. "Each gargoyle has its own unique." Her voice faded as the group moved on, leaving Adrian's view of Walter momentarily clear again. Walter had reached the memorial garden now, his cane tapping softly against the path as he made his way toward the central monument. The garden was quieter than the main square, its high hedges creating a sense of isolation. Daniel Cooper smiled. It was perfect. He nodded to his companions and they began to spread out, following the old man into the garden. From his post, Adrian could see Noah Parker shifting slightly, breaking protocol by turning his head a fraction toward the garden entrance. They had discussed situations like this during their training years. Sometimes, their instructor had said, the greatest threat isn't to the palace itself, but to what it represents. Those words echoed in Adrian's mind as he watched Walter disappear behind the hedges, followed by his stalkers. The War Memorial itself was a solemn piece of architecture, a marble column rising from a circular base, surrounded by bronze plaques listing the names of fallen heroes. Walter approached it with reverence, removing his cap as he always did. He didn't hear the footsteps behind him until it was too late. "Nice collection you've got there, old-timer." Daniel's voice cut through the morning quiet. Walter turned slowly, his grip tightening on his cane. The three men had positioned themselves to block both exits from the memorial area. "Must be worth a pretty penny." Walter's voice remained steady, though his hand trembled slightly. "These medals are not for sale, young man. They represent sacrifice and service." His eyes darted toward the garden entrance, but the high hedges blocked any view of the main square. Tommy Walsh laughed, the sound harsh against the garden's tranquility. "Who said anything about buying them?" He stepped closer, reaching for one of the medals. "Maybe you'd like to donate them to a good cause?" Adrian's muscles coiled with tension. The memorial garden was technically outside his assigned observation zone, but he could still hear every word. Commander Sullivan's training sessions had never covered this exact scenario, but her voice rang in his memory. A royal guard's discretion is as important as their discipline. Luke Bennett, the quietest of the three, had moved to Walter's left side. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Come on, Gramps, make it easy on yourself. You had your glory days, time to share the wealth. His hand reached for Walter's jacket, fingers brushing against a medal that Adrian recognized as a distinguished service cross. Walter jerked back, nearly losing his balance. "These were earned with blood," he said, his voice rising slightly. "My friends died earning theirs. They're not yours to take." The old soldier's dignity in the face of threat stirred something deep in Adrian's chest, a combination of anger and admiration that made his next decision inevitable. Daniel Cooper stepped forward, his face hardening. "Have it your way, old man. We'll take them regardless." He reached for Walter's collar, and in that moment several things happened at once. Walter raised his cane in a defensive gesture. A tourist's child peeked around the hedge and gasped, and Adrian Reeves made a decision that would change everything. The sound of measured footsteps on gravel made all three thugs turn. Adrian approached with the measured pace of his training, each step deliberate and purposeful. His crimson uniform seemed to absorb the morning light, lending him an almost otherworldly presence. The tourist child ducked back behind the hedge, but the damage was done. Attention was being drawn to the garden. "Step away from him." Adrian's voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition. He had dropped the rigid pose of ceremony, his body now coiled with controlled energy. Daniel Cooper's eyes widened as he realized that the seemingly decorative guard was very much a real threat. Walter Harrison stood straighter, his own military bearing returning as he recognized a fellow soldier coming to his aid. The three thugs exchanged glances, their easy confidence cracking as they faced unexpected opposition. The morning breeze rustled through the memorial garden, carrying with it the distant sounds of tourist chatter and the weight of imminent confrontation. Time seemed to freeze in the memorial garden as Daniel Cooper sized up the royal guard who had dared to intervene. The morning sun caught the brass buttons of Adrian's uniform, each one gleaming like a small flame. Tourist voices drifted over the hedges, creating a surreal backdrop to the tense standoff. "This doesn't concern you," Daniel said, trying to maintain his air of authority, despite the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Walk back to your post, soldier boy. Pretend you didn't see anything." His attempt at intimidation fell flat against Adrian's unwavering stance. Adrian's response was measured, each word carrying the weight of his training and conviction. "I'm making it my concern." His eyes flickered briefly to Walter, noting how the elderly veteran had shifted his grip on his cane, ready to defend himself if necessary. The old soldier's courage only strengthened Adrian's resolve. Tommy Walsh, the youngest of the three thugs, fidgeted nervously. "Dan, maybe we should—" But Daniel cut him off with a sharp gesture. Pride and anger had overcome his better judgment, and he took a step toward Adrian, entering the guard's personal space. "You're just for show," Daniel sneered, his face inches from Adrian's. "All dressed up in your fancy uniform, standing around like a statue. What are you going to do? Salute us to death?" Behind him, Luke Bennett laughed weakly, but the sound held more nervousness than mirth. Adrian remained perfectly still, but his voice carried a new edge. "Last warning, step away from Mr. Harrison and leave the grounds." The use of Walter's name made Daniel blink in surprise. He hadn't expected the guard to know the old man personally. From his position by the garden entrance, Noah Parker had subtly shifted to maintain a clear view of the situation. His hand rested on his communication device, ready to call for backup, but he waited, trusting his friend's judgment while preparing for the worst. Walter Harrison's voice cut through the tension, carrying the authority of his military years. "Young man," he addressed Adrian, "you don't have to risk your position for me. I can handle these." He never finished the sentence. Daniel Cooper, frustrated by being ignored, made his fatal mistake. The thug spun around and grabbed Walter's jacket, fingers closing around one of the medals. "Enough talk!" In that instant, several things happened simultaneously. Walter brought up his cane defensively. Tommy Walsh took a startled step backward, and Adrian Reeves moved with a speed that his ceremonial uniform belied. Adrian's first move was precise, a tactical step forward followed by a grip break that separated Daniel's hand from Walter's metals. The motion, practiced countless times in training, was smooth as silk. Daniel stumbled back, shock replacing his arrogance as he realized that the Royal Guard's training went far beyond standing at attention. Luke Bennett tried to circle behind Adrian, but years of maintaining situational awareness while standing post had honed the guard's spatial perception. Without taking his eyes off Daniel, Adrian pivoted slightly, positioning himself to keep both threats in view while ensuring Walter remained protected. "Tommy," Daniel barked, "get the old man's other side." But Tommy Walsh had seen enough. The young thug backed away, hands raised. "No way, Dan, this isn't worth it." His retreat created a moment of confusion that Adrian used to his advantage. In one fluid motion, Adrian stepped between Walter and his remaining attackers. His voice carried across the garden, pitched to carry beyond the hedges. "Crown Haven Palace Security, respond to the Memorial Garden." The call was unnecessary. Noah Parker had already activated his radio, and the subtle sounds of approaching footsteps indicated that help was on the way. Daniel Cooper, realizing his plan had unraveled, made one last desperate attempt. He lunged forward, not toward Walter this time, but at Adrian, throwing a wild punch that telegraphed his intentions. Adrian's response was textbook perfect, a deflection that used Daniel's own momentum to send him stumbling past, followed by a controlled takedown that left the thug face down on the gravel path. Luke Bennett, seeing his leader subdued, turned to flee, but found his path blocked by Noah Parker and two other guards who had arrived silently during the confrontation. The Memorial Garden was suddenly full of uniformed personnel, their presence forming a stark contrast to the peaceful setting. Walter Harrison stood straight-backed through it all, his military bearing on full display. As palace security officers began taking statements and securing the scene, he turned to Adrian with a look of profound respect. "Thank you, son," he said quietly. Not many would risk their position to help an old soldier. Adrian maintained his professional demeanor, but something in his eyes softened. "Sir, these medals represent sacrifice and courage. Protecting them, and you, is no risk. It's an honor." He paused, then added, "My grandfather served. He taught me that sometimes the greatest acts of duty happen off the battlefield." Commander Grace Sullivan arrived moments later, her presence commanding immediate attention. She surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. The subdued attackers, the calm professionalism of her guards, and the dignified bearing of both Adrian and Walter. Her expression revealed nothing, but those who knew her well might have caught a flicker of approval in her gaze. "Guard Reeves," she said formally, "I'll need your full report. This incident will require review." Her tone was neutral, but Adrian could read between the lines. He had broken protocol by leaving his post, but he had also upheld the deeper principles of his position. Around them, the garden slowly returned to its peaceful state. Tourist murmurs beyond the hedges had grown excited as word of the incident spread. A young child peeked around the corner again, this time accompanied by a parent who looked at Adrian with undisguised admiration. Daniel Cooper and Luke Bennett were led away by palace security, their swagger replaced by sullen defeat. Tommy Walsh, who had chosen to back down, was being questioned separately, his earlier withdrawal working in his favor. As the immediate crisis subsided, Adrian became aware of the weight of what had just occurred. He had chosen to break formation, to step beyond the rigid boundaries of his role. Yet standing there in the morning sun, watching Walter Harrison proudly adjust his medals, he knew he would make the same choice again. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Crown Haven Palace as Adrian Reeves stood at attention in Commander Grace Sullivan's office. The room, with its dark wood paneling and historical photographs of past royal guards, seemed to hold centuries of tradition in its walls. Through the window, he could see tourists still gathering near the Memorial Garden, their excited chatter suggesting that word of the morning's events had spread. Commander Sullivan sat behind her desk, reviewing the incident report with careful precision. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her uniform bore the distinguished medals of her own service. After what seemed like an eternity, she looked up at Adrian. "Guard Reeves," she began, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "Your actions this morning present us with an unusual situation." She stood, walking to the window that overlooked the memorial garden. "You left your post without authorization. You engaged with civilians outside your designated zone of responsibility. You involved yourself in what could be classified as a public disturbance." Adrian maintained his rigid posture, preparing himself for the consequences. "Yes, Commander." Sullivan turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You also prevented the assault of a decorated veteran, protected priceless medals of honor, and demonstrated exceptional judgment in a volatile situation." She paused, studying his face. "Tell me, Guard Reeves, what was going through your mind when you made the decision to intervene?" Adrian chose his words carefully, aware that his answer could determine his future with the Royal Guard. "Commander, during training you taught us that our duty extends beyond the physical protection of the palace. You said we represent centuries of tradition, honor, and service to the people." He took a breath before continuing. "When I saw those men threatening Mr. Harrison, I saw them threatening everything those medals represent: sacrifice, courage, duty. I couldn't stand by and watch that happen, even if it meant breaking protocol." A subtle change crossed Sullivan's face. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. "Your fellow guard, Parker, reports that you maintained professional conduct throughout the incident. The security footage confirms this." She returned to her desk, picking up another document. "We've also received statements from several witnesses, including a rather passionate letter from a young tourist who apparently watched the whole thing. She wrote that you showed her what a real hero looks like." The door opened after a brief knock, and Senior Guard Supervisor Sarah Mitchell entered with another file. "The preliminary report from Palace Security, Commander," she said, placing it on the desk. "They've confirmed that Daniel Cooper and his associates have been linked to several other incidents involving veterans. They've been targeting medals for underground collectors." Sullivan nodded, dismissing Mitchell with a gesture. Once they were alone again, she fixed Adrian with an intense gaze. "Guard Reeves, do you know why we maintain such strict protocols about leaving our posts?" "Yes, Commander. The safety of the palace and its occupants depends on maintaining a secure perimeter at all times." "Correct. And yet..." She opened the new file, scanning its contents. "According to this, the moment you engaged with the situation, Guard Parker adjusted his position to compensate for your absence, maintaining overlapping fields of observation. He didn't break formation himself, but he ensured no security gaps were created by your actions. That shows exceptional unit cohesion and situational awareness from both of you." Adrian remained silent, though his mind was racing. Noah had never mentioned adjusting his position. They had worked together so long that some responses had become instinctive. "There's also the matter of Mr. Harrison," Sullivan continued. "He's requested to speak with Palace administration. Apparently, he has some thoughts about today's events that he feels should be on record." She stood again, this time walking to a large painting of Crown Haven Palace that dominated one wall. "Do you know what the public sees when they look at us, Guard Reeves?" "They see tradition, ma'am. Ceremony. The continuity of the crown." Sullivan nodded. "They see living history. But what they saw today was something more. They saw that tradition and ceremony don't preclude compassion and courage." She turned to face him directly. "The review board will make its final decision tomorrow, but I want you to understand something. Sometimes upholding our deeper duties requires us to be flexible about our surface protocols." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Mitchell reappeared, looking slightly concerned. "Commander, Mr. Harrison is here. He's quite insistent about speaking with you, and Guard Reeves, immediately." Walter Harrison entered the office with measured steps, his cane tapping softly on the polished floor. He had changed his jacket, but his medals still caught the afternoon light. Despite the morning's ordeal, he carried himself with the same dignity that had first caught Adrian's attention. "Commander Sullivan," Walter said, offering a crisp salute that spoke of years of military service. "I apologize for interrupting, but I felt this couldn't wait." He turned to Adrian, who still stood at attention. "At ease, son. You've done enough standing straight for one day." Sullivan gestured to a chair. "Please, Mr. Harrison, sit. I understand you have something to add to our review of this morning's incident?" Walter settled into the chair but kept his spine straight. "Indeed I do. That young man did more than stop some thugs today. He showed me that the values we fought for, the ones these medals represent, are still alive in the next generation." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "I took the liberty of calling some of my old contacts. Did you know that similar incidents have been reported at other historical sites, veterans being targeted for their medals?" Sullivan accepted the paper, scanning its contents with growing concern. "This suggests an organized operation." "Precisely," Walter nodded. "Those men today weren't just common thieves. They knew what they were looking for. They'd done this before." He looked at Adrian with approval. "Your guard's intervention may have done more than protect one old soldier. He may have helped expose a larger threat to our veteran community." Adrian absorbed this information, understanding now why Daniel Cooper and his associates had seemed so practiced in their approach. The implications sent a chill down his spine. How many other veterans had been targeted when no one was watching? Commander Sullivan studied both men for a long moment, her decision crystallizing. "Guard Reeves, report to your post tomorrow at the usual time. But I'm adding a new duty to your rotation: coordination with Palace security regarding veteran protection protocols." She held up a hand to forestall any response. "We'll need to establish proper procedures, of course, but it's clear that this is an issue requiring attention." Walter Harrison smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Well done, Commander. I'd be happy to assist in any way I can. My experience might be useful in identifying potential threats." As the meeting concluded and Walter prepared to leave, he paused beside Adrian. "You know, son, when I was serving, we had a saying. Courage isn't about following orders. It's about knowing which orders to follow and which ones to transcend for a higher duty. You proved that today." Evening had settled over Crown Haven Palace, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. Adrian Reeves stood in the palace security office, examining photographs spread across a gleaming conference table. Each image showed veterans at different locations: museums, memorials, public ceremonies, and in each one, familiar faces lurked in the background. Daniel Cooper and his associates hadn't been working alone. Noah Parker leaned against the doorframe, his day shift complete, but his concern evident. "They've been busy," he said quietly, picking up one of the photos. "Look at this one. Same technique, different city. They wait for older veterans, usually ones attending ceremonies alone." Sarah Mitchell entered with a fresh stack of reports, her normally composed features tight with concern. "We've got confirmation from 3 other jurisdictions. The underground market for stolen military medals is larger than anyone realized. These aren't just random thefts. They're targeting specific decorations, especially from World War II veterans." Adrian's jaw clenched as he studied the pattern. The thought of veterans being systematically targeted stirred a deep anger in him. He picked up another photograph, this one showing an elderly veteran being helped up after what the report described as an accidental fall near a war memorial. The man's medals were reported missing afterward. "The worst part," Sarah continued, "is how long this has been going on without anyone connecting the dots. These incidents were treated as isolated cases, petty crimes. No one saw the pattern until now." A knock at the door drew their attention. Walter Harrison entered, accompanied by Commander Sullivan. The elderly veteran moved with purpose despite the long day, his eyes sharp as he took in the evidence spread across the table. "Just as I suspected," Walter said, tapping one of the photos with his cane. "I recognize this location, the National War Memorial. 3 months ago, my friend George Matthews was attacked there. They took his Distinguished Service Medal." His voice carried a weight of personal loss. "George passed away last month. Never saw his medal returned." Commander Sullivan moved to the head of the table, her presence commanding attention. "Mr. Harrison has been helping us understand how these criminals choose their targets. They're not just opportunists. They're studying veteran gatherings, learning patterns, identifying the most valuable medals. Adrian straightened, his mind racing. The palace ceremonies, he said suddenly. That's why they were here. We host veteran recognition events every month. Walter nodded grimly. Exactly, son. Where else would you find so many decorated veterans in one place? They were scouting, waiting for the next ceremony. I was just their practice run. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, removing a carefully folded piece of paper. I made some calls to my old unit's survivors. 3 of them reported similar incidents in the past year. Sarah Mitchell began pinning the photos to a large corkboard, connecting them with red string. A pattern emerged, a web of related incidents spreading across multiple cities, all centered around locations with military significance. We've identified at least 12 members of this network, Commander Sullivan explained, pointing to surveillance photos. Daniel Cooper and his team were just one cell. They target veterans at ceremonies, monuments, anywhere medals are likely to be worn publicly. Noah moved closer to the board, his expression darkening. But why? These medals aren't made of precious metals, their monetary value isn't that high. It's not about the medal, Walter said softly. It's about what they represent. There are collectors, wealthy ones, who want these symbols of courage and sacrifice as trophies. They don't care about the cost to the veterans, the memories they're stealing. Adrian studied the faces in the surveillance photos, memorizing each one. Commander, we need to do more than just protect the palace grounds. These men will just move to softer targets if we fortify here. Sullivan's eyes met his, and he saw his own determination reflected there. Agreed. That's why I've spoken with Palace Administration. We're establishing a new security initiative, coordinating with local police and veteran organizations. Mr. Harrison has agreed to act as our liaison with the veteran community. Walter smiled slightly. These crooks thought old soldiers would be easy targets. They forgot that we still know how to fight. We just need to adapt our tactics. Sarah began distributing folders to everyone present. We've compiled profiles of known members of the network. Palace security will be briefed on identifying suspicious behavior during ceremonies. We're also reaching out to other historic sites and military museums to share intelligence. But we need to be careful, Commander Sullivan cautioned. If they realize we're onto their larger operation, they might accelerate their activities or go underground. We need to catch them in the act, build a case that will shut down the entire network. Adrian opened one of the folders, studying the detailed profiles within. They'll be back, he said with certainty. They've had too much success to abandon such a target-rich environment, and now they have a personal grudge after this morning's failure. Walter's expression hardened. Let them come. But this time we'll be ready. He turned to Commander Sullivan. The next veterans ceremony is in 2 weeks. I suggest we use it to set a trap. Agreed, Sullivan nodded. But we'll need to coordinate carefully. One wrong move could put other veterans at risk. Noah straightened from his position by the wall. We'll need to maintain normal routines. They'll be watching for any changes in security patterns. Sarah began making notes. I'll coordinate with local police. We can position plainclothes officers among the ceremony attendees. Adrian looked at Walter, seeing the same resolve he felt mirrored in the old soldier's eyes. Mr. Harrison, we'll need your help to spread the word discreetly. Other veterans need to be warned, but without tipping our hand. Walter nodded, his military training evident in his tactical thinking. I'll reach out through our networks, quietly. Many of us still remember how to pass messages without drawing attention. Commander Sullivan gathered them closer, her voice low and determined. This ends here. Crown Haven Palace has always been a symbol of tradition and honor. We'll not let it become hunting grounds for those who prey on heroes. She looked at each person in turn. What these criminals failed to understand is that they're not just facing isolated veterans or individual guards. They're facing a united front of those who understand what duty and sacrifice truly mean. As the meeting concluded and plans were set in motion, Adrian felt a fierce pride in his role as a royal guard. Today had proven that sometimes the greatest service came not from standing rigid at attention, but from adapting and acting when duty called. The next 2 weeks would test them all, but he was ready. The hunters were about to become the hunted. The 2 weeks leading up to the veterans' ceremony passed with excruciating slowness. Crown Haven Palace maintained its usual routines: tourists flowing through the gates, guards at their posts, scheduled events proceeding without interruption. But beneath this peaceful surface, preparations were underway. Adrian Reeves stood at his morning post watching the sun climb over the palace walls. His uniform was as immaculate as ever, but his awareness had shifted. Every face in the crowd received new scrutiny, every lingering presence noted and assessed. Noah Parker, at his own station across the square, maintained similar vigilance. During his brief breaks, Adrian met with Walter Harrison in the palace security office, poring over intelligence reports and ceremony preparations. The elderly veteran had proven invaluable, his military experience lending crucial insights to their planning. "They'll have someone new," Walter said during one such meeting, tapping a surveillance photo with his cane. "Cooper and his team were just foot soldiers. Their handler will want to assess the situation personally now that their operation is compromised." Commander Sullivan nodded, adding another pin to their increasingly complex investigation board. "Our sources confirm unusual travel patterns among known associates. Someone's definitely coming to town, but they're being careful. Multiple vehicles, indirect routes." Sarah Mitchell entered with fresh coffee and updated security logs. "We've identified 3 potential suspects arriving in the past week, all checking into different hotels under various aliases, all with patterns matching our target profile." Adrian studied the new information, his trained eye picking up subtle details. "They're establishing observation points," he noted, indicating several locations on the palace perimeter map. "See these check-in times? They're creating overlapping surveillance shifts." The palace itself had become a chessboard of subtle movements. Plainclothes officers mixed with tourists, their casual poses concealing constant vigilance. Regular guards maintained their posts while specially trained units prepared for rapid response. Every entrance, every shadow, every potential escape route was mapped and monitored. Walter's network of veteran contacts had spread the word with remarkable efficiency. Those planning to attend the ceremony were quietly briefed. Wear your medals proudly, maintain normal routines, but stay alert and within sight of security personnel. The trap needed to appear completely natural to succeed. One evening, as sunset painted the palace windows in amber light, Adrian found Walter sitting alone in the memorial garden. The old soldier was lost in thought, his weathered hands resting on his cane. "Everything all right, sir?" Adrian asked, taking a seat beside him. Walter smiled faintly. "Just remembering. You know, during the war, we faced enemies we could see. Bullets, bombs. They came at you straight on, but this..." He gestured vaguely. "This shadows and sneaking targeting old men for their medals. It feels different. Worse somehow." Adrian nodded, understanding. "Because it's not just an attack on individuals. It's an attack on what those medals represent. Courage, sacrifice, honor." "Exactly." Walter straightened, his military bearing returning. "These collectors, the ones buying our medals, they think owning these pieces of metal gives them some connection to greatness. But they don't understand. The metal isn't what matters. It's the blood and tears and sacrifice these medals represent." Their conversation was interrupted by Noah Parker's arrival. "Security sweeps complete," he reported. "We've identified 3 more potential spotters around the perimeter. They're being discreet, but their pattern matches the profile." Commander Sullivan had established a rotating schedule of security meetings, never using the same room twice to avoid drawing attention. That evening's briefing was held in a small office overlooking the palace gardens. "Tomorrow's ceremony will proceed as planned," Sullivan announced to the assembled team. "Our intelligence suggests they'll make their move during the reception afterward, when security appears more relaxed." She activated a digital display showing the palace grounds. "We've identified their likely approach vectors and prepared countermeasures." Sarah Mitchell distributed updated assignments. "Remember, our primary goal is to identify and apprehend the operations leadership. The street-level thieves are replaceable. We need the ones giving the orders." Adrian reviewed his position. He would maintain his regular post during the ceremony, providing a visible reminder of normal palace security. But his location had been carefully chosen to allow quick response if needed. Walter would serve as both bait and observer, his presence at the ceremony guaranteed to draw attention. "I'll be wearing my full set," he said, patting his jacket pocket where his medals waited, including a few special ones they won't be able to resist. The plan was intricate but flexible, designed to adapt to whatever approach the criminals chose. Plainclothes officers would mingle with the crowd, their positions calculated to cover every angle. Palace security cameras had been supplemented with hidden units, ensuring no blind spots. As the meeting concluded, Commander Sullivan held Adrian back. "Guard Reeves a moment." She waited until the others had left before continuing. "Your actions 2 weeks ago set this in motion. Tomorrow will be dangerous. These people won't risk leaving witnesses if things go wrong." Adrian stood straight, his resolve firm. "Understanding, Commander, but we can't let them continue targeting veterans." Sullivan's expression softened slightly. "No, we can't. Just remember, you're not alone in this. We're all committed to seeing it through." She paused, then added, "Your grandfather would be proud." The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for an outdoor ceremony. Adrian took his post as usual, watching early tourists begin to gather. Noah caught his eye briefly from across the square. Everything was in position. Walter Harrison arrived early, his medals gleaming in the morning sun. He moved through his usual routine, pausing at the memorial garden as he always did. To any observer, it was just another day at Crown Haven Palace. But beneath the calm surface, tension mounted. Somewhere in the growing crowd, their targets were watching, planning, preparing to strike. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait for the hunters to make their move. Adrian maintained his rigid pose, but his senses were heightened to their peak. Every instinct told him that by day's end, everything would change. The question was, who would emerge victorious in this silent war for honor? The veterans' ceremony began precisely at 11 o'clock. Rows of chairs filled Meridian Square, each one occupied by either a veteran or their family members. The autumn breeze carried the sweet scent of late-blooming roses from the palace gardens, mixing with the crisp morning air. Medals glinted in the sunlight, each one representing countless untold stories of courage and sacrifice. Adrian Reeves maintained his post with practiced precision, but his eyes constantly scanned the assembled crowd. Noah Parker, positioned at the opposite corner, did the same. Between them, a carefully choreographed dance of plainclothes security personnel moved through the gathering, their casual demeanor masking constant vigilance. Walter Harrison sat in the front row, his medals prominently displayed. Several other veterans had quietly positioned themselves nearby, creating a protective circle that appeared completely natural to any observer. Commander Sullivan, in full dress uniform, stood at the podium, beginning her welcome address. "Today we gather to honor those who have served," she began, her voice carrying across the square. "Their sacrifices have preserved the very freedom we enjoy." As she spoke, Adrian noticed movement at the periphery of the crowd. 3 men he didn't recognize had taken positions at different points around the square. Their casual clothes and tourist cameras didn't quite mask their focused attention on the assembled veterans. Sarah Mitchell's voice came through his nearly invisible earpiece. "Confirmed visual on subjects Alpha, Beta, and Charlie. Maintaining observation." The carefully planned operation was in motion, but something felt off. Adrian's instincts, honed by years of training and recent events, told him they were missing something. The ceremony proceeded with dignified precision. Various speakers took the podium, sharing stories of service and sacrifice. Walter sat alert but relaxed, playing his role perfectly. To anyone watching, he appeared to be simply another proud veteran enjoying a moment of recognition. Then Adrian spotted him, a well-dressed man in his 50s, moving through the crowd with practiced ease. Unlike the other suspects, his attention wasn't focused on the veterans or their medals. Instead, he was studying the security positions, his experienced eyes noting patrol patterns and camera locations. This had to be the handler, the one coordinating the operation. "New player," Adrian murmured into his concealed microphone. Southeast corner, gray suit, silver tie, showing tactical awareness. He received 2 clicks in his earpiece, acknowledgement without compromising the operation. The well-dressed man paused near a group of tourists, casually taking photos with an expensive camera. But Adrian noticed how the 3 previously identified suspects subtly adjusted their positions in response to his movements. They were coordinating through some silent signal system. Commander Sullivan was concluding her speech, announcing the beginning of the reception phase. This would be the most vulnerable time. Veterans moving about, security appearing more relaxed, countless opportunities for their targets to strike. The handler's presence confirmed their intelligence. This would be their main attempt. Walter stood slowly, using his cane for support, and made his way toward the refreshment area. As expected, 2 of the suspects began to drift in his direction. The third moved toward a different group of veterans, likely as a diversion, but the handler remained in place, still observing. Adrian maintained his rigid pose, every muscle tense with anticipation. Through his earpiece, he could hear Sarah Mitchell coordinating their response teams. All units hold positions. Wait for primary target to commit. The reception area filled with veterans and their families, creating a complex mix of movement and conversation. Walter had positioned himself near a table, apparently absorbed in conversation with another elderly veteran. The 2 suspects drew closer, one of them now carrying a small paper plate as a prop. Suddenly, Adrian noticed something that made his blood run cold. A 4th man had appeared, moving with deliberate purpose toward the palace entrance behind him. Unlike the others, this one moved with military precision. A professional. The handler was a diversion, and they'd nearly missed the real threat. "New contact," Adrian whispered urgently. "West entrance, combat trained, be advised." His warning was cut short as several things happened at once. The 2 suspects near Walter made their move, one apparently stumbling into him while the other reached for his medals. Simultaneously, the 3rd man created a commotion by dropping a drink near another group of veterans. But Adrian's attention was fixed on the military-trained operator, who had used the chaos to slip past the palace security checkpoint. This wasn't just about stealing medals. They were using the ceremony as cover for something bigger. Commander Sullivan's voice came through crisp and clear. "All units, split response. Primary team maintain metal protection protocol. Secondary team redirect to west entrance breach. Guard Reeves, you're authorized to engage." Adrian faced a split-second decision. The suspects near Walter were being handled by plainclothes officers moving in with practiced efficiency. But the unknown operator had disappeared into the palace, and every second increased the potential threat. With fluid motion born of countless drills, Adrian stepped away from his post. Noah Parker smoothly adjusted his position to cover the gap, while Walter, showing remarkable awareness for his age, helped coordinate the veterans to clear a path for the response team. The handler in the gray suit suddenly moved, speaking rapidly into what appeared to be a watch. Adrian caught fragments of the transmission through his earpiece. "Compromised. Initiate contingency. Full extraction." Inside the palace, Adrian's footsteps echoed off marble floors as he pursued the unknown operator. Years of standing guard had given him intimate knowledge of every corridor, every possible route. He could hear Sarah Mitchell coordinating additional security through his earpiece. But for now, he was the closest responder. The ceremony outside had devolved into controlled chaos, but Adrian remained focused on his pursuit. Whatever their true objective was, he was determined to prevent it from succeeding. The honor of Crown Haven Palace, and the veterans they had gathered to celebrate, demanded nothing less. Adrian's footsteps echoed through the palace corridors as he pursued the unknown operator. His earpiece crackled with updates from outside. The metal theft attempt had been foiled, with 3 suspects in custody, but the handler in the gray suit had vanished during the confusion. Now Adrian's focus was entirely on the military-trained intruder who had penetrated the palace's inner security. "Subject heading toward the east wing," he reported quietly into his microphone. "Moving with purpose, he knows where he's going." That detail bothered him most. This wasn't opportunistic. The intruder had a specific objective. Sarah Mitchell's voice came through. Archives are in that section. Special collections, including military records. Be advised, backup is 2 minutes out. The revelation hit Adrian like a thunderbolt. This was never just about stealing medals. They were after something specific in the palace archives. The operator turned down another corridor, his movements precise and efficient. Adrian followed at a measured pace, using his knowledge of the palace layout to maintain pursuit while staying out of sight. Years of standing guard had taught him every corner, every shadow, every acoustic quirk of these historic halls. Through his earpiece, he could hear Commander Sullivan coordinating the response outside. All units be advised. Possible connection to classified military documents in the archives. Treat suspect as highly trained and dangerous. The ceremony's disruption had been an elaborate diversion, using the medal theft attempt to mask a more sophisticated operation. Adrian rounded a corner just in time to see the operator using some kind of electronic device on the archive's security panel. The man's movements were quick and practiced, definitely military training, probably special operations. The door clicked open with a soft beep. "Subject breaching archives," Adrian whispered. "Request immediate lockdown of..." His transmission was cut short as the operator suddenly spun, revealing a face Adrian recognized from security briefings. Victor Kane, former Special Forces, now a mercenary specializing in data theft. The medal theft ring had been a cover for something far more sinister. "Stay back," Kane ordered, his voice cold and professional. "This doesn't concern you." His stance suggested advanced combat training, confirming Adrian's assessment. Adrian maintained his position, analyzing the situation. Kane was blocking the archive entrance, his right hand concealed behind his back. The corridor offered limited maneuver room, and backup was still at least a minute away. "Crown Haven Palace Security," Adrian announced clearly. "Step away from the archives." His voice carried the authority of his position, even as his mind raced through tactical options. Kane's expression remained neutral. "You're not just a ceremonial guard, are you? Interesting." His eyes flicked to Adrian's uniform, noting the subtle signs of combat readiness beneath the formal exterior. "But you don't want to interfere with this. Walk away. No one needs to get hurt." Through his earpiece, Adrian could hear Sarah Mitchell. "Back up 30 seconds out, keep him talking." But Adrian recognized the tension in Kane's posture. He wasn't going to wait for backup to arrive. "The medal thefts," Adrian said, buying time. "They were just cover for accessing the archives. What are you really after?" A hint of a smile crossed Kane's face. "Smart, but you're still thinking too small. The medals, the archives, they're all pieces of a larger puzzle." He shifted slightly, revealing what he held, a compact data drive. Some stories from the war never made it into the history books. Some secrets stayed buried. Until now. Adrian's mind raced. The palace archives contained classified military documents dating back to World War II, including records that had never been digitized. Whatever Kane was after, it had been worth orchestrating months of veteran harassment as a cover. "You used those veterans," Adrian said, feeling a surge of anger. "Targeted their medals, their dignity, just to create a distraction." "Necessary theatrics," Kane replied coldly. "The real prize was always here. Now, last chance. Walk away." His stance shifted subtly, preparing for action. At that moment, Walter Harrison's voice came through Adrian's earpiece. "Archives have a secondary security system. Old school, mechanical." The elderly veteran's knowledge of palace history might have just given them an edge. Adrian noted the archive door hadn't fully closed behind Kane. If Walter was right about the secondary system. "Those medals you targeted," he said, stepping slightly to his left. "They represent something you couldn't buy or steal, real courage." Kane's eyes narrowed at Adrian's movement. "Courage? I've seen enough of war to know it's all propaganda. The medals, the ceremonies, just pretty decorations for ugly truths." His words carried a bitter edge of cynicism. "You're wrong," Adrian replied, shifting his weight. "Those medals stand for choices, moments when ordinary people chose to be extraordinary." His hand moved to his collar, adjusting it in what appeared to be a nervous gesture. Kane tensed, expecting an attack, but Adrian had something else in mind. With a swift motion, he grasped his brass button, the one Walter had specially modified during their planning, and twisted hard. A metallic click echoed from inside the archives. Kane spun at the sound, realizing too late what it meant. The archive's old mechanical security system, installed decades ago and never removed, slammed into action. Metal shutters dropped over the shelves as emergency lights flashed. Adrian moved the instant Kane turned, crossing the distance between them with explosive speed. His ceremonial uniform, tailored for freedom of movement, didn't restrict the techniques drilled into every royal guard. Kane was skilled, but he was caught between Adrian's advance and the archive's security response. The clash was brief, but intense. Kane's Special Forces training showed in his reactions, but Adrian had surprise and position on his side. They grappled in the narrow space, Kane trying to protect the data drive while Adrian worked to contain him without causing damage to the sensitive archives. The sound of running feet announced the arrival of backup. Kane, realizing his position was untenable, made one last attempt to break free. But Adrian had been trained for exactly this kind of close-quarters control. Using Kane's own momentum, he executed a precise takedown that left the mercenary face down and secured. As palace security swarmed the area, Adrian retrieved the data drive Kane had dropped in the struggle. Commander Sullivan arrived moments later, her expression grim as she surveyed the scene. "Well done, Guard Reeves," she said, accepting the drive. "Though I suspect we've only scratched the surface of what this is really about." She turned to the security team. "Full lockdown of the archives. I want every document checked, every access point secured." Sarah Mitchell arrived with an evidence bag for the drive. "Sir, preliminary reports from outside. The handler escaped, but we have the 3 other suspects in custody. They're already talking. Seems they didn't know the full scope of what they were involved in." Adrian straightened his uniform, the brief signs of struggle already fading. "They used veteran harassment as cover for an intelligence operation. The question is, what were they really after?" Commander Sullivan's expression was troubled. "Whatever it is, it was worth orchestrating months of systematic attacks on our veterans. This goes deeper than we thought." She turned to Adrian. "Return to your post for now. We need to maintain the appearance of normalcy while we investigate." As Adrian walked back through the palace corridors, his mind was racing. They had stopped the immediate threat, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. Whatever secrets lay in those archives, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to access them, and they weren't likely to give up after one failed attempt. The evening cast long shadows through Crown Haven Palace's windows as Adrian Reeves stood in Commander Sullivan's office. The captured data drive sat on her desk, now secured in an evidence bag. Walter Harrison occupied a chair near the window, his experienced eyes studying a series of documents spread before him. "It's not just about the archives," Walter said, tapping a newspaper clipping with his cane. "These attacks on veterans, they were looking for something specific, something they thought one of us might have." Sarah Mitchell entered with a fresh stack of files, her face showing signs of the long day. "We've interrogated Kane. He's professional, trained to resist questioning, but his equipment tells a story." She laid out several photographs of the devices they'd recovered. Advanced tech, military-grade encryption. This wasn't some amateur operation. Commander Sullivan stood at her window, watching the last tourists leave the palace grounds. "The handler's disappearance concerns me most. Kane was the expert, but someone else was calling the shots." She turned to face them. "Mr. Harrison, you said there might be a connection to your old unit?" Walter nodded slowly, his weathered hand smoothing out a yellowed photograph. "During the war, my unit was involved in something called Operation Nighthawk. Most records were classified, some destroyed, but each key officer received a medal with a unique engraving, a failsafe, in case the information ever needed to be verified." Adrian stepped closer, studying the photograph. It showed a younger Walter with his unit, all of them bearing medals he didn't recognize. The medal thefts weren't random, he realized. They were searching for these specific medals. "Precisely," Walter confirmed. 3 members of my old unit reported their medals stolen in the past month. I might have been their last target. He reached into his jacket, withdrawing a medal Adrian hadn't seen before. This is what they were after. The medal seemed unremarkable at first glance, but under close inspection, Adrian could see tiny markings etched along its edge. Walter handled it carefully as though it carried more than just memories. Operation Nighthawk, Commander Sullivan mused. That name appears in some of the files Kane tried to access. What exactly were you involved in, Mr. Harrison? Walter's expression grew distant. It's not my story alone to tell. But if they're hunting these medals now, after all these years... He straightened in his chair. Someone's trying to piece together what we found, something that powerful interests wanted buried. Sarah Mitchell approached with a laptop, displaying a map marked with red dots. We've traced similar medal thefts across 3 countries, all targeting veterans from specific units, all within the last 6 months. She zoomed in on Crown Haven. This was meant to be their final acquisition. Adrian's mind raced through the implications. The handler, the man in the gray suit, he'll try again. These people have invested too much to give up now. Commander Sullivan nodded grimly. Agreed. Which is why we're implementing new security protocols. She activated a wall screen showing enhanced security measures. Mr. Harrison's medal will remain in secure storage here at the palace. We'll use it to set our own trap. Ma'am, Adrian interjected. With respect, we need to go on the offensive. The handler saw our security response. Next time, they'll be better prepared. What do you suggest, Guard Reeves? Adrian moved to the map display. They've been targeting veterans systematically, using the metal theft ring as cover. But now we know their pattern. He pointed to several locations. These aren't just theft sites. They're a trail. Each veteran they targeted was connected to Operation Nighthawk. Walter leaned forward, interest sparking in his eyes. The boy's right. They're working their way through a list, and I think I know who might be next. He withdrew a small notebook from his pocket. I've stayed in touch with the surviving members of my unit. There's one who might know more about what they're really after. James Morrison, living in retirement up north. Sarah Mitchell quickly typed the name into her computer. Confirmed. James Morrison, decorated veteran, same unit. No attempts on his medals reported yet. Because they didn't know about him, Walter explained. Jim went off the grid years ago, changed his name, moved to a quiet town. Only a few of us know where to find him. He looked at Adrian. And he has the other half of the story we need. Commander Sullivan studied the map thoughtfully. You're suggesting we get to him first. It wasn't a question. Yes, Adrian replied, but we have to move carefully. If the handler realizes we're pursuing the same information, he'll accelerate his timeline, Walter finished. These people, whoever they are, they've spent months building their operation. They won't let a single failed attempt stop them. Commander Sullivan was silent for a long moment, weighing options. Finally, she turned to Adrian. Guard Reeves, I'm temporarily reassigning you to Special Security Detail. Your primary duty will be protecting Mr. Harrison and helping him make contact with his former colleague. What about the palace? Adrian asked, though he already knew the answer. Noah Parker will cover your duties here. We'll adjust rotations to maintain normal appearance. She faced Walter. Mr. Harrison, are you prepared for what this might stir up? Old secrets have a way of biting back. Walter's expression was resolute. Commander, I'm 95 years old. I've carried these secrets long enough. Maybe it's time they saw the light of day. He gripped his cane firmly. Besides, those thugs thought we'd be easy targets. Time to show them how wrong they were. Sarah Mitchell began preparing briefing documents. I'll coordinate with local authorities near Morrison's location. We can establish a secure communication channel. No, Walter interrupted. Too risky. Jim won't trust official channels. This needs to be personal, face to face. He looked at Adrian. Hope you're ready for a road trip, son. Adrian felt a mixture of anticipation and concern. This assignment would take him far from his usual duties into unknown territory. But the thought of the handler still out there planning his next move steeled his resolve. Commander Sullivan began issuing orders, setting the operation in motion. This stays completely off official channels. As far as anyone knows, Guard Reeves is on standard rotation, and Mr. Harrison is simply visiting an old friend. As the meeting concluded and preparations began, Adrian caught Walter studying his medal one last time before surrendering it to secure storage. The old veteran's eyes held a weight of history that went far beyond the simple metal disc. "Ready for this?" Walter asked quietly. Adrian straightened his uniform. "Whatever they're after, sir, we'll find it first." "Good man." Walter smiled grimly. "Because I have a feeling the real fight is just beginning." The countryside rolled past as Adrian drove the unmarked car north, Walter Harrison sitting quietly in the passenger seat. They had left Crown Haven Palace before dawn, taking back roads to avoid attention. Adrian had exchanged his ceremonial uniform for civilian clothes, though his bearing still marked him as military. 2 hours to Morrison's place, Walter said, studying a worn map. He had refused to use GPS, insisting that old-school methods were safer. Assuming he hasn't changed his habits, he'll be having breakfast at the local diner right about now. Adrian glanced at the rearview mirror, checking for any signs of surveillance. Commander Sullivan had arranged for discreet backup teams to shadow them at a distance, but so far the journey had been uneventful. Almost too uneventful. "Tell me about Morrison," Adrian prompted, keeping his eyes on the road. "What makes his part of the story so important?" Walter was silent for a moment, his weathered hands tracing the edge of his map. "Jim was our communications expert during Operation Nighthawk. While the rest of us were focused on the mission, he was documenting everything. Not just official reports. He kept his own records, coded in a way only unit members would understand." The morning sun broke through clouds as they passed through a small town. "And these records?" Adrian asked. "They're what our friends at the palace were really after." "Part of it." Walter shifted in his seat, his expression growing distant. "What we found during Nighthawk, it wasn't just military intelligence. It was something older, something that powerful people wanted to keep buried." He checked his watch. Jim's records might be the only proof left of what really happened. They stopped at a rural crossroads, waiting for a train to pass. Adrian used the moment to check in with their backup team through a secure radio. "Checkpoint Alpha, status report." "All clear," came the response. "No suspicious vehicles or activity in your sector." The train rumbled past, its rhythmic clatter filling the silence. Walter watched it thoughtfully. "You know, during the war, we used trains to move sensitive materials. Hidden in plain sight, just another transport among hundreds." As they resumed their journey, the landscape became more remote. Small farms gave way to wooded hills. Adrian noticed Walter growing more alert, his eyes scanning the surroundings with veteran's instinct. "Pull over here," Walter suddenly instructed, pointing to an unmarked dirt road. "Jim's place is through those trees, but we should approach on foot. He'll have warning systems in place." Adrian parked the car in a natural alcove, concealing it from the main road. As they began their walk, he noticed subtle signs of security measures. Cameras disguised as birdhouses, pressure plates hidden under fallen leaves. "Morrison's been busy," Adrian observed, noting the professional setup. Walter nodded. "Jim never really left the war behind. Always said they'd come looking eventually." He paused, raising his cane. "Hold up. See that pattern in the gravel?" Adrian stopped, noticing how certain stones had been arranged in what appeared to be a random pattern. Walter carefully rearranged several pieces, forming a sequence only a unit member would recognize. "Signal to let him know friends are coming," Walter explained. "Jim's paranoid, but he's not wrong, especially now." They emerged into a clearing where a modest cabin stood. Smoke rose from its chimney, and a weather-beaten truck sat in the driveway. Everything looked normal, peaceful even, but Adrian's training noted the reinforced windows and strategic sightlines. Before they could reach the door, it opened. James Morrison stood in the doorway, his tall frame still straight despite his age. His eyes, sharp under gray brows, took in every detail of his visitors. "Walt," he said simply. "Been wondering when you'd show up." His gaze shifted to Adrian. "And you brought a royal guard. Things must be worse than I thought." Walter gripped his friend's hand firmly. "Good to see you, Jim. Mind if we come in? Got some stories to trade." Morrison stepped aside, allowing them entry. The cabin's interior was sparse but functional, with multiple exits and clear paths to defensive positions. A ham radio hummed quietly in one corner, monitoring frequencies few people knew existed. "They came for my medal last week," Morrison said without preamble, bolting the door. "3 men professionals. Would have succeeded too if I hadn't been expecting them." Adrian's attention sharpened. "What happened?" Morrison's weathered face creased in a grim smile. "Let's just say they left empty-handed and with a healthy respect for old soldiers." He moved to a concealed safe, entering a complex combination. "But you're not here about the medal, are you, Walt?" "This is about the records." Walter settled into a chair, his expression serious. "They hit the palace archives yesterday. Professional job, military-trained operative. They're getting desperate, Jim. It's time." Morrison withdrew a weathered leather case from the safe. "Been carrying this burden a long time, old friend. Sure you want to open this door?" "They're not going to stop," Walter replied. "And I'm too old to keep running. Adrian here prevented them from taking my medal, but they'll try again. Better to face it head on." Morrison placed the case on a table, its worn surface marked with faded military stamps. "Your young guard friend? He's cleared for this level of classified material?" "Commander Sullivan authorized full disclosure," Adrian confirmed. "Whatever this is about, sir, it's affecting the present. We need to understand what they're after." Morrison exchanged a long look with Walter, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, he opened the case, revealing stacks of coded documents and what appeared to be old photographs. "Operation Nighthawk wasn't just a military mission," Morrison began, his voice low and controlled. "We were sent to investigate something our leaders couldn't explain, something that challenged everything we thought we knew about history." He spread several photographs across the table. They showed what appeared to be ancient ruins, but with anomalies that made Adrian's eyes widen. Structures that shouldn't have existed, markings that defied conventional archaeology. "The medals," Walter added, "they're not just decorations. The engravings contain coordinates, codes, a fail-safe system to verify the truth if it ever needed to come to light." Adrian studied the materials, his trained mind processing implications. "And now someone wants to erase that truth. The question is, why now, after all these years?" Morrison's expression darkened. "Because time's running out. The same patterns we discovered, they're happening again. Someone high up realized the connection and started erasing the evidence. The medals, the archives, my records, they're the last proof of what's coming." The weight of history seemed to fill the small cabin as the 3 men contemplated what lay before them. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon as if nature itself sensed the gravity of the moment. "We need to get these documents to Commander Sullivan," Adrian said finally. "Set up proper security protocols." But before anyone could respond, a distant alarm chimed, one of Morrison's perimeter sensors. Someone was approaching the cabin, and they hadn't used the recognition signal. The perimeter alarm's soft chime seemed to freeze time inside Morrison's cabin. Adrian moved instantly to a defensive position, years of training taking over. Morrison was already at his security monitors, checking multiple camera feeds. 3 vehicles approaching from the north, he reported calmly. Professional formation, and look who's leading them. The monitor showed a familiar figure in a gray suit, the handler from Crown Haven Palace. Walter stood at the window, his military bearing returning despite his age. "They followed us after all. Question is how?" Adrian's mind raced through possibilities. The backup team should have spotted any tail. He activated his secure radio but received only static. Communications are being jammed. Morrison moved with surprising agility for his age, retrieving a hidden rifle. Got a fallback position prepared. Underground bunker, connects to tunnels from the old mining system. He turned to Walter. "Just like Normandy, eh, old friend?" Walter's eyes gleamed with remembered steel. "Bit worse odds this time, Jim." He checked his pockets, ensuring the coded documents were secure. "Adrian, you should take the records and go. No sense risking everything on 3 old soldiers." Adrian's response was immediate. "My duty is to protect you both, sir. And those records aren't going anywhere without us." He moved to help Morrison gather essential materials. "How many entrance points to the cabin?" "4," Morrison answered, activating hidden security measures. "Main door, back entrance, cellar hatch, and roof access. They'll know about the obvious ones, but the cellar might surprise them." Metal shutters quietly slid over the windows as he typed commands into a concealed panel. The handler's voice suddenly crackled through Morrison's radio system, having hijacked the frequency. "Mr. Morrison, Mr. Harrison, I believe we can resolve this situation professionally. All we want are the records and medals. No one needs to get hurt." Morrison snorted, continuing his preparations. "Same thing they said at Dresden. Didn't believe it then either." He handed Adrian a secure satellite phone. "Emergency frequency. Command code is Nighthawk. Get word to your Commander Sullivan if you can." Outside, vehicles had stopped just beyond the tree line. Adrian counted at least 8 figures deploying in tactical positions. The handler remained by his car, coordinating through a headset. "Jim," Walter said quietly, "the contingency package. Is it ready?" Morrison nodded grimly, moving to another hidden safe. "Been ready for 30 years. Just never thought we'd need it." He withdrew a small metal case, its surface unmarked. "Last resort only. Has to be unanimous." Adrian divided his attention between the security feeds and the veterans' cryptic exchange. "Whatever you're planning, we need to move fast. They're setting up a cordon." The handler's voice came through again. 2 minutes, gentlemen, then we do this the hard way." Morrison finished inputting commands into his security system. "Exterior defenses armed. Won't stop them long, but might buy us time." He turned to his old friend. "Walt, you sure about this? Once we use the contingency, there's no going back." Walter's expression was resolute. "They want to bury the truth, Jim. Erase what we found, what we sacrificed to protect. I won't let that happen." He faced Adrian. "Son, what you're about to see. It goes beyond palace security, beyond military secrets. Are you prepared for that?" Adrian thought of his oath as a royal guard, of the deeper meaning behind his service. "Whatever it is, sir, I'll see it through." Morrison nodded approvingly. "Good man, like the guards who stood with us back then." He opened the metal case, revealing what looked like an ancient medallion covered in unfamiliar markings. Time to show them why some secrets are worth keeping. The first explosions hit Morrison's exterior defenses, sending tremors through the cabin. The handlers' teams had begun their assault. Adrian moved to secure their position, but stopped short when Morrison held up the medallion. The markings began to glow with an impossible light, casting strange shadows through the cabin. Walter produced his medal, the one they'd protected at the palace, and Adrian saw the same markings etched along its edge, now shimmering with inner fire. "Operation Nighthawk," Walter explained quickly as more explosions rocked the perimeter. "Wasn't about military intelligence, we found something that rewrote everything we thought we knew about history, about humanity itself." He placed his medal against the medallion, causing the glow to intensify. Morrison's voice was grim. "The medals weren't just recognition for service, they're keys, part of a system left behind by, well, let's just say our ancestors weren't alone." He looked at Adrian. "Those ruins in the photos? They're still active, still waiting." The cabin's lights flickered as another explosion hit closer. Through the security feeds, Adrian saw the assault teams advancing through the smoke, but his attention was riveted by what was happening with the medallion. The combined glow from the artifacts had become a controlled beam, projecting what looked like coordinates and symbols onto Morrison's wall. But these weren't any maps Adrian recognized. They showed locations, connections, and patterns that seemed to defy conventional geography. "The handler and his employers," Walter said, working quickly with Morrison to document the projections. "They don't want to preserve this knowledge. They want to control it, exploit it. That's why they've been gathering the metals, trying to access the archives." Adrian's training warred with what he was witnessing. "Those records you kept." "Proof," Morrison confirmed. Proof that we're not the first civilization to reach this level of development. Proof that others tried to use this knowledge before, with catastrophic results. He secured the new documents. That's why we split up the information, hid it in plain sight, too dangerous for any one group to control. The perimeter defenses were failing systematically now. Adrian could hear breaching charges being set on multiple entry points. The handler's voice came through one final time. Last chance. Surrender the artifacts and records. Walter stood straight, years seeming to fall away as he faced the coming battle. They think we're just 3 old soldiers and a palace guard. He checked his position, determination burning in his eyes. Time to show them what we're really made of. Adrian moved to cover the most vulnerable entrance, his mind processing everything he'd learned while preparing for the imminent assault. Whatever the truth behind Operation Nighthawk, whatever secrets those metals truly held, one thing was clear. They couldn't let this knowledge fall into the wrong hands. The first breaching charge detonated at the main entrance, and the battle for humanity's hidden history began. Smoke filled Morrison's cabin as multiple breaching points failed simultaneously. Adrian moved with practiced efficiency, helping Walter and Morrison towards the cellar entrance while covering their retreat. The handlers' teams were professional, coordinated, but they hadn't counted on facing 3 generations of military experience working in concert. Contingency package secure? Walter called over the chaos, clutching the vital documents. Morrison patted his jacket pocket, the medallion safely stored alongside his medals. Ready for transit. Underground route's our best option now. He triggered one last security protocol, and hidden sprinklers activated, not with water, but with a dense smoke designed to confuse thermal imaging. The handler's voice cut through their radios. The artifacts! Don't let them damage the artifacts. His desperation was evident now, revealing just how crucial these items were to his employer's plans. Adrian maintained his position as Walter and Morrison accessed the cellar entrance. Years of Royal Guard training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, to think strategically even in chaos. He could hear the assault teams breaching multiple points, their movements precise but cautious. They couldn't risk damaging what they'd come to steal. Down! Morrison shouted suddenly. Adrian dropped instantly as a flashbang grenade bounced through a broken window. The explosion was deafening, but Morrison's warning had saved them from its full effect. Walter, showing remarkable agility for his age, had already reached the cellar stairs. Like Bastogne in 44, he called to Morrison. Remember the tunnel gambit? Morrison's eyes lit up with understanding. Adrian, he said quickly, when I give the signal, head for the north tunnel. Don't stop, no matter what you hear. The first of the assault team breached the kitchen entrance wearing full tactical gear. Adrian engaged immediately, his Royal Guard combat training proving more than a match for their expectations of an easy target. He disabled 2 operators in quick succession, using their own momentum against them. Morrison had reached a control panel near the cellar entrance. Walt, show them why they called us the Ghost Unit. His fingers flew over the keys as Walter retrieved something from his coat. Simple smoke grenades, but modified with military precision. The handler's voice crackled through again. Whatever you're planning, it won't work. The tunnels are already surrounded. Walter smiled grimly. That's what the Germans thought too. He activated the grenades, but instead of throwing them, he placed them strategically near air vents. Morrison's sophisticated ventilation system would do the rest. Adrian had reached the cellar entrance when the next wave of attackers came through, but Morrison's preparations were paying off. The modified smoke was filling the cabin through multiple vents, creating a disorienting pattern that even night vision couldn't penetrate effectively. Now, Morrison called. Adrian helped Walter through the cellar entrance, covering their retreat as Morrison triggered his final surprise. Hidden charges, non-lethal but powerful, detonated in sequence, creating a cascade of confusion among the assault team. The underground tunnel system was a marvel of preparation. Morrison had spent years expanding and reinforcing old mining shafts, creating a labyrinth that only he fully understood. As they moved through the darkness, guided by Morrison's confident leadership, Adrian heard the handler's increasingly frustrated commands above. They're splitting up. The handler's voice was barely audible now. Multiple thermal signatures in the tunnel system. Find them. Morrison led them through a series of sharp turns, his memory of the layout flawless. They'll have teams at every marked exit, he said quietly. Good thing we're not using those. Walter nodded in understanding. The old vertical shaft? Exactly. Emergency exit even they won't expect. Adrian maintained security as they moved, impressed by the veterans' coordination. What about the artifacts? The documents? Already transmitted, Morrison revealed, patting a hidden transmitter in his vest. Dead Man's switch activated when they breached the cabin. Everything we know, everything we discovered, it's already reaching secure locations worldwide. Too many copies to suppress now. Walter checked his watch, its face glowing faintly. Backup team should be in position. Your signal reached them, Jim. 5 minutes ago. Crown Haven's finest are about to spoil someone's day. They reached what looked like a dead end, but Morrison quickly revealed a hidden lift mechanism. Above them, they could hear the handlers' teams searching in the wrong directions, following false trails Morrison had spent decades preparing. As they ascended the vertical shaft, Adrian heard new voices on the radio, Commander Sullivan coordinating a massive response. The handlers' team, so focused on their underground pursuit, had missed the arrival of significant reinforcements above. They emerged a quarter-mile from the cabin in a hidden bunker disguised as an old storm cellar. Through the trees, they could see multiple police and military vehicles surrounding the area. The handlers' operation was completely compromised. Commander Sullivan herself met them at the secure perimeter, her expression showing both relief and pride. The documents are safe, she confirmed. Multiple secure facilities have acknowledged receipt. Whatever they were trying to bury, it's out now. Walter straightened his jacket, metals glinting in the late afternoon sun. Some secrets need to be kept, he said firmly. Others need to be revealed at the right time. The trick is knowing the difference. The handler and his team were taken into custody, their operation in ruins. As Adrian watched them being processed, he understood that his role as a royal guard had evolved into something greater. He wasn't just protecting a palace or its ceremonies, but the very truths that shaped their world. Days later, standing at his post at Crown Haven Palace, Adrian noticed Walter Harrison approaching with his usual measured stride. The elderly veteran nodded respectfully as he passed, their shared secret adding new depth to the simple gesture. Morrison's records were now secure in multiple locations, the truth they'd protected finally ready to emerge when the time was right. Commander Sullivan had made it official. Adrian's actions had not only been justified, but had helped expose a threat to national security. His post at the palace now carried additional responsibilities, helping coordinate veteran protection and historical preservation efforts. As the sun set over Crown Haven Palace, Adrian stood proudly at his post, knowing that true guardianship meant more than following protocols. It meant standing ready to protect what really mattered, whether it wore a medal or carried the weight of history itself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.